I'm 74 years old. I didn't plan to say this out loud. I've lived most of my life believing some things are better kept to yourself. But when you reach this age, you realize silence doesn't protect anyone. It just delays the truth until there's no one left to hear it. I'm talking to you because you still think you have time. I used to think that too. I assumed important things could wait until life slowed down, until responsibilities eased, until there was a better moment. There always seemed to be a reason not to speak, not to pause, not to show up fully. This isn't advice. It's a warning I wish I had listened to myself. Because there comes a point when you realize the moments you postponed don't come back. And when that realization arrives, it doesn't announce itself loudly. It just sits there, heavy and permanent. That's where I am now. For most of my life, I believed love was something solid once it was established, like a structure you build early and then rely on. I thought commitment itself was proof enough. If two people stayed together, shared a home, paid the bills, showed up when needed, that meant love was intact. I didn't think it required daily attention. I thought it could survive on intention alone. I believed my role was clear: work hard, be reliable, don't disappear, don't fail. I measured my care in hours worked and problems solved. I thought that was what mattered most. When I came home exhausted, I saw that as evidence of effort, not absence. I told myself that sacrifice was a form of affection. That belief didn't come from nowhere. It was everywhere. Other men lived the same way. Older men admired it. Society rewarded it. Emotional restraint was treated like strength. Talking less was seen as maturity. Expressing feelings too often was considered unnecessary, even indulgent. I absorbed all of that without question. So when days passed without meaningful conversation, I didn't panic. When we spoke mostly about schedules, responsibilities, and practical things, I thought that was normal. When I noticed a quiet distance forming, I explained it away as adulthood. I assumed intimacy naturally faded into something calmer, quieter, less demanding. I told myself that love didn't need to be proven repeatedly, that if it was real, it would endure silence. I assumed she understood my feelings without me putting them into words. I assumed my presence in the house was enough, even when my attention wasn't. There were moments when something felt slightly off, small pauses, a look I didn't fully read, a sentence that lingered longer than it should have. But I brushed those aside. I was busy, tired, focused on what felt urgent. I believed there would be time later to address the deeper things. I didn't see neglect because it didn't look like cruelty. There was no shouting, no dramatic conflict, no clear breaking point. Everything appeared stable. That stability convinced me I was doing things right. Looking back now, I understand how convenient that belief was. It allowed me to avoid discomfort. It allowed me to stay in motion without reflection. It allowed me to believe that effort in one area excused absence in another. At the time, I felt justified. I wasn't careless. I wasn't irresponsible. I wasn't unfaithful. By the standards I accepted, I was doing well. That's what makes this lie so dangerous. It doesn't feel like a mistake while you're living inside it. You only recognize it for what it is when the chance to correct it is gone. Life didn't fall apart. That's important to say. It simply continued. And that's how I missed what was happening. Most days followed the same pattern. Wake up early. Get ready without thinking. Drive the same roads. Sit in the same chair. Solve the same problems. Come home with my mind still at work, even when my body wasn't. I didn't feel lost. I felt occupied. There's a difference, and it matters. At home, everything ran on routine. Meals happened at familiar times. Conversations stayed practical. Who needed what? What had to be done tomorrow? What couldn't wait? I listened just enough to respond. I answered without really absorbing. My attention was divided even when I was physically present. Evenings passed with the television on or phones nearby. We were in the same space, but not fully with each other. I didn't notice that being together had slowly turned into coexisting. It felt harmless because it happened gradually. Years moved forward quietly. Birthdays came and went. Holidays blended together. I marked time by obligations instead of experiences. I remember deadlines better than moments. I remember stress more clearly than laughter. That should have warned me, but it didn't. I told myself this was adulthood, that this was what long-term relationships looked like once the excitement faded. I believed stability meant things were healthy. There was no crisis forcing me to stop and look closely, so I didn't. I stopped checking in emotionally because nothing seemed broken. I stopped asking questions that didn't have immediate answers. I stopped noticing changes because they didn't demand action. Autopilot is comfortable. It doesn't announce itself. It feels like efficiency, like progress. You don't realize you're on it because everything still works. Bills get paid, days stay full, life appears functional from the outside. But while I was moving forward without awareness, something essential was being left behind. I just didn't know it yet. The moment that changed everything didn't arrive the way people expect. There was no argument before it. No warning that forced me to pay attention. It was an ordinary day until it wasn't. I was at work when the phone rang. I remember thinking it was an interruption. I almost let it go to voicemail. When I answered, the voice on the other end was careful. Too careful. People only speak like that when they're about to say something that can't be taken back. The words were simple, direct. There was no drama in how they were delivered, but they landed all the same. She was gone. Not later. Not soon. Gone. I stood there longer than I needed to. Everything around me kept moving. Phones rang. People talked. Someone laughed down the hall. None of it made sense in that moment. I remember noticing small details instead. The color of the wall, the hum of the lights, how quiet my own breathing sounded. There was no final conversation, no chance to ask questions I'd avoided, no opportunity to say the things I'd assumed I'd say eventually. The idea that there would be a right time vanished instantly. It hadn't been postponed. It had been erased. When I went home, the house looked exactly the same. That was the cruelest part. Her things were still there. The chair she sat in, the cup she used, the habits she left behind. Everything was intact except the one thing that mattered. Absence doesn't announce itself loudly. It settles in slowly. At first, you expect to hear footsteps, a voice from another room. Then you remember. Over and over again. That's when the weight of what I'd done or hadn't done began to surface, not as guilt, as clarity. I saw the distance that had been growing for years, not as something temporary, but as something I had accepted without questioning. I realized the worst part wasn't losing her suddenly. It was knowing I'd been present physically but absent in ways that counted. The gap between us hadn't been caused by one mistake. It was built quietly, day by day, while nothing seemed wrong. That moment didn't just take her away. It took my excuses with it. There was no one left to blame time on. No future version of myself to fix things. Just the truth, standing there with me, undeniable and final. Some events don't change your life by adding pain. They change it by removing illusion. That was one of them. Regret didn't arrive the way I expected it to. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't knock me over all at once. It showed up quietly, in fragments, when there was finally nothing left to distract me. It came in the mornings first. I would wake up and for a brief moment, forget. That brief moment was almost peaceful. Then reality would return, and with it, memory. Not the big moments, the small ones, the ordinary ones I had treated as replaceable. I thought about evenings when she tried to talk and I answered without really listening. Times she sat beside me while my attention was somewhere else. Conversations that ended early because I was tired or preoccupied. I replayed them, not to punish myself, but because they refused to stay buried. There were things I never said because they felt unnecessary at the time. gratitude, appreciation, affection without a reason attached to it. I assumed those things were understood. I assumed consistency made them obvious. I was wrong. I regretted how often I chose convenience over connection. How often I postponed emotional effort because it didn't feel urgent. I remembered moments when she paused, waiting for me to say something more, and I didn't. I didn't notice that those pauses were invitations. I thought they were just silence. What hurt the most was realizing how recoverable those moments had been back then. None of them required grand gestures. None of them needed perfect timing. They only required attention. And attention was something I treated as optional. Regret isn't about wishing you'd done something heroic. It's about wishing you'd done the simple things more often. Stayed a little longer in a conversation. Asked one more question. Put something else down when it mattered. I don't feel sorry for myself. That's not what this is. This is acknowledgement, clear-eyed and unavoidable. These are moments that will never be revisited. No apology can reach them. No explanation can soften them. People talk about closure as if it's something you earn. Some things don't offer that. They just remain open, unfinished, and permanent. You don't move on from them. You move with them. That's what regret really is. Not pain that fades, but clarity that stays. The realization didn't feel profound when it finally arrived. It felt obvious, almost embarrassing in its simplicity. I remember thinking that if someone had said this to me years ago, I would have nodded and gone right back to living the same way. What mattered was never what I thought it was. It wasn't the long hours. It wasn't the stability I worked so hard to protect. It wasn't the idea of being responsible or dependable in ways that looked good from the outside. What mattered was whether she felt noticed while she was still there. I had treated love like something permanent by default, as if once it existed it would stay intact without being acknowledged. I assumed shared history could replace daily presence. I assumed reliability could stand in for attention. I was wrong on both counts. I sacrificed moments for routines. I chose efficiency over engagement. I protected my energy for things that felt productive and spent what was left on the people I claimed mattered most. By the time I saw the imbalance, it was no longer something I could adjust. I had believed that providing meant caring, that keeping things running smoothly was enough. I didn't understand that emotional presence isn't a side benefit of a stable life. It is the point of it. Nothing I chased remembers me now. The work ended. The obligations dissolved. The routines that once felt so important don't keep me company. What remains is the absence of the one person who would have. That's the part that's hard to accept. Not that I worked hard, but that I worked hard at the wrong things for too long. Some realizations come early enough to act on. Some don't. This one didn't. If you're still listening, I want you to notice what's happening inside you right now. You're probably thinking of someone, a partner, someone close, maybe more than one person. And alongside that thought is an explanation, a reason, an excuse that feels reasonable. You're busy. You're tired. You're under pressure. Things are complicated right now. You'll be more present once this phase passes, once work settles, once the stress eases, once there's more space. That logic feels solid when you're inside it. I know because I used it every day. It doesn't sound like neglect. It sounds like responsibility. It sounds like adulthood. It sounds like doing what needs to be done. What you don't see yet is that life doesn't pause to reward patience. It doesn't wait for things to become convenient. The phase you're in now doesn't end cleanly. It just blends into the next one. I assumed there would be a clear moment when I could slow down, when I'd finally have the energy to show up fully. That moment never arrived, not because I was unlucky, but because I misunderstood how time works. It doesn't give warnings. It doesn't ask if you're ready. You think you'll notice when something really matters. I thought that too. But what actually matters often looks ordinary while it's happening. It only becomes obvious when it's no longer available. It's too late for me. I'm not saying that dramatically. I've accepted it. Acceptance doesn't mean peace. It just means clarity without denial. There are no conversations left to have, no presents left to offer. That door is closed. For you, it might not be. That's not a promise. It's a temporary condition. So here's the truth, stated plainly. The way you're living right now is not neutral. Every day you postpone attention, you are choosing something else instead. And whatever you're choosing feels important enough to justify the trade. One day, you'll look back and see the exchange clearly. The only question is whether the person you're postponing will still be there when you do.